All right, so tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the disability community.
Sure. So my name is Heather Feldner. I am a cisgendered white woman. I use she, her pronouns. Um, I currently do not identify as having a disability myself, but I am a parent and a daughter of family members who are disabled. And so, though I have studied disability academically and have caregiving experience, I don't have lived experience. And so, I think that's just important to mention because it really limits and shapes the perspectives that I can bring to the conversation today. Um, I have a clinical background, actually. I trained as a physical therapist, um, and I practiced in the clinic for probably close to 13 years full time before I started doing a little bit more teaching and then going back into graduate school for a PhD. And I had an opportunity to do a PhD in disability studies. And that was really awesome because it was a chance to really kind of explore some of the tensions and some of the complexities that I hadn't necessarily considered about disability as a clinician. Um, and it really, I just learned a whole lot more about kind of the social construct of disability and how disability is perceived in society and the, resulting discrimination and oppression that has historically been imposed upon people with disabilities. And so that was just a really awesome opportunity to um, kind of bring what I had learned in the clinic and bring this new knowledge and sit with that and kind of, you know, um, delve into some of that the complexities and that conflict. Um, and after I graduated from, I went to UIC, University of Illinois, Chicago, and it was just a great program there. And then I came out west to Seattle to University of Washington and did a few years as a postdoc in mechanical engineering. Then I was able to join the rehab medicine faculty and the disability studies faculty at University of Washington. So my current roles are that I teach and do research in the rehab medicine department at the University of Washington. I do some student advising and some research in the disability studies program. And then I also am involved in a new center on campus called CREATE, and that stands for the Center for Research and Education on Accessible Technology and Experiences. So it's a long name, so we call it CREATE. Um, and that is a center that we just developed over the pandemic, so it's only been a couple years in existence. But what's really neat about that is it's also very interdisciplinary. It is We have folks representing School of Medicine and myself. We've got folks from mechanical engineering and human-centered design, computer science, the information school. So folks from across the UW campus that had been invested in some sort of accessibility work, maybe physical accessibility, digital accessibility, whatnot. And so we came together and formed this center with some backing from various entities around the area, and that's just been a lot of fun too. So um, I would say, in terms of that, I have always really been interested in disability and disability rights and disability justice. I think that's definitely shifted over the last decade or so with my disability studies education. It's much more kind of landed in the disability justice space. Um, but have continued to be involved with assistive technology through my research, but looking at that from a very, very much of an equity lens, like how do we um, for for people with physical disabilities who may use adaptive equipment. How do we design that equipment better? How do we ensure that physical spaces are accessible? How do we start to shift people's attitudes about what it means to use technology versus using body power to move through the world. um, and it's been a lot of fun. It's definitely been an awesome journey, and I um, having the family experience, the family lived experience, but not any of my own. One of my main goals is to really try and amplify the voices of disabled people through my research and through my work. So I do a lot of qualitative research. I do a lot of participatory action methodology to really try and amplify voices from within the community that I don't personally have that experience of.
Yeah, because that's one of my next questions. Like, tell me a little bit about your research, because you also focus on things like physical therapy, seating and mobility technology, and a bunch of other stuff. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say right now my research is in kind of two main buckets. The first is seating and mobility bucket, that technology bucket. And as a clinician, I worked primarily in pediatrics. So I worked with kids anywhere from birth to age 21 and sometimes even older. Um, and part of my clinical focus was in the seating and mobility clinic. So working with kids, families, working with equipment vendors to evaluate and provide training for using different mobility technologies. So whether that be like a walker or a gait trainer or a manual wheelchair or a powered wheelchair. So I had some clinical experience in that, and that carried through to my research. I was lucky enough at the program that I went to at UIC that in addition to the PhD in disability studies, I could simultaneously work on a certificate in assistive technology. And so some of that was design and fabrication related, some of that was provision related, and some of it was really looking at kind of um, the justice and equity behind, who gets equipment and who doesn't, and what does that process entail, and why do those processes, sometimes take so long, or um, and so that really influenced that influence kind of stayed throughout both my clinical and my research career. And so I got to work on a really cool program in grad school called Go Baby Go. And that is at this point, international mobility and socialization project focused on enhancing mobility and socialization for very young kids with disabilities. What we have kind of seen is that there's a lack of mobility related products designed for young kids. There's been this big push in the industry to get kids up and walking and that sort of thing. And what we were really trying to push back on with Go Baby Go was that, working on developmental skills and motor skills is really important, but also so is being able to move yourself around and explore your environment in whatever way that takes shape. And so just in terms of advancing all of the learning processes that happen when a child gets to do that for themselves rather than, being passively moved. And so it kind of it pushes back on that idea of like walking is the only way. And it also pushes back a little bit on this idea that like there needs to be better design and more products available for kids across the lifespan. And so part of most of my mobility technology research has been involved in that kind of early childhood age. We have modified these Go Baby Go cars. So I don't know if you've ever seen um, like a Power Wheels vehicle, like it's like a toy car, it's battery operated, and but it looks like a car, and the kids can kind of drive it around. What the Go Baby Go program does is it allows us to create safety and accessibility modifications to those cars so that kids of all abilities can access and move through their environment independently, and kind of changes the conversation about what assistive technology can look like, and also fills this gap that hopefully will be temporary, because it's not a replacement for a wheelchair or anything else like that. Um, but it again provides a more equitable experience for mobility and exploration. And so we've been looking at a lot of doing a lot of research with those Go Baby Go cars. We've asked parents their perceptions. We've had some 3, 4, and 5 year olds that have been able to participate in some of our interviews. So we've asked their opinions. If they could design their own mobility device, what would it look like? What would it be made of? We've used some photographic methods. So families are documenting like what's easy for their kids to access, what are some of the more challenging aspects of their mobility and access. And then we're also looking at some, a little bit more traditional kind of rehab measures in terms of how certain muscle groups are activated, if a child is in a seated driving position versus a standing driving position, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a really unique blend of rehab and disability studies. So that's kind of that long-winded explanation of the first bucket of research that I'm involved in. And then I think the second one has just come up more over in the last 5 years or so. We've really started looking at disability allyship and experiences of ableism for folks across the lifespan with disabilities. We started looking at that just for students on the UW campus, students, staff, and faculty. And we, again, have done a lot of qualitative work just trying to understand people's experiences of ableism and allyship, and how might that translate into a some sort of educational product or process. Right now it's in kind of workshop form, and we're trying to look at and see if increasing education about ableism and allyship, and kind of how people might encounter those experiences in their daily lives. Like, can we shift disability attitudes? Can we change people's perspectives more positively toward disability and disability identity through education and engagement in training materials and action items and recognition and representation and things like that. So that's a little bit of a newer bucket, but again, very much just draws from my past experiences, and so we have a couple projects that are ongoing right now that we're working on in that space as well, and that's been a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, the Go Baby Go project is so cool.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So if I could just like ask, like, do you guys partner with any stakeholders in your efforts in terms of like physical therapy, mobility, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is just a really important part of what we do. And it's been really wonderful because we've been able to um, create a research community that is inclusive of people with and without disabilities, people who use mobility technology. Specifically for Go Baby Go, we're actually putting together a parent advisory panel right now to help advise our activities. So we really, really want to do what we can to, again, amplify the voices of the communities that we work with. Um, and again, kind of thinking about that that mantra, nothing about us without us, from the disability community. It's something that is very important to me, especially since I don't yet identify as disabled. Even in my caregiving role, I think that that's a different experience. That's obviously a different experience. And so, um, really making sure that we're consistently engaging in research work with our disabled colleagues, having mixed ability teams, really even thinking about how that not only in research, right, but in thinking about like our admissions processes for the students that we bring into our programs, things like that. That's something that's really important. Um, and we can, I think, we've done um, a pretty good job of that in the last few years, but I think that we still have a lot further to go in terms of that. But it's really important to me in terms of how I structure my research, how we kind of create our research teams, how we even develop projects, right? Like gathering stakeholder input to even talk about what questions we should ask. That's a process that we've engaged in a couple of different situations, and it's always been so valuable. There was we just recently completed a study, that it was a qualitative study, with the cerebral palsy community. And we were focusing on their experiences across the lifespan with access to and use of supportive mobility equipment, right? So that ties back into that interest. But one of the things that we did as a part of that research process was, before we even formulated our research questions, we did a stakeholder panel. And there were 9 panelists that had CP or were the caregiver of CP, or of someone with CP, or were involved in equipment provision for people within the CP population. And so we worked with those stakeholders as the first part of our research to even understand, like, what are research priorities for this community in relation to mobility? Like, what questions should we be asking? How do we go about this in a way that's inclusive of our stakeholders and such? So that was a really valuable experience too. And that work just got published. So it makes the process so much more valuable. And it's such an essential part of any research, in my opinion, that those stakeholders need to be involved in some way, some meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if I could ask, like, what impact does, like seating mobility, things like assistive technology have on people with disabilities and just the community as a whole?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, this is an outsider perspective, because I use some forms of mobility technology, but I don't use, like, for example, I don't use a walker, gait trainer, wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that it is so, the responses that we have received from the people that we've gotten a chance to meet and interact with through our research is that it is freedom and it is liberation. Mobility equipment, it's funny because you hear that term, like, wheelchair bound, quote unquote, right? Um, and I hate that term, because everything I've heard from people in the disability community who use mobility technology say it's the exact opposite. It's freedom. It's the thing that enables their participation. It's the thing that enables their engagement in the community. Um, and it is just such an important part of their lives. And in some cases, people refer to it as an extension of their own bodies. Um, and so I just see it being as such a pivotal, mobility for all of us is so pivotal in leading our engagement with the world, regardless of how that mobility happens. And so I think it's just such a key piece of life, for people with disabilities. And it's sometimes not designed that way.
Hmm.
It's sometimes not treated that way in terms of delays with repairs or, design decisions and such. So, um, I don't know. I hope that does that answer that question?
Hmm. Yeah, it pretty much, yeah,
Okay.
it does. So finally, if I could ask, like, what what difference can, like physical therapy, seating and mobility technology, how can those types of tools make a difference in people's lives and, really create an equitable and inclusive world?
Mm, that's a great question. And I think I'm gonna answer that in two parts, because I think from a physical therapy standpoint, right, we are very much practitioners who are working with people and their bodies, right, in terms of um, the skills and the abilities that someone has. And I think our role as PTs is to really listen to our clients and really pay attention to what their goals are, because we have a subset of knowledge and training, but they have the lived experience. And so how do we kind of bring those together to maximize that person's participation, right? um and I think, you know physical therapists are problem solvers. And I think that is something that we can, hopefully offer people who are seeking our services, whether it's, after an injury, after, a surgery, or even, in the presence of a lifelong disability. Um, but I think we as physical therapists have as much to learn about, um, that lived experience too. And so I think if we can create a partnership, it can be really impactful into, improving skills, improving, thinking about problem solving, barriers to participation and to access, and reducing pain is another huge one, that I think we can have a really positive impact on, in partnership with, with our clients and what they think is important, right? Um, and so I think that is, a little bit different, because there's that one-on-one kind of component, right? With something like seating and mobility equipment, I feel like there's still that one-on-one, but then we introduce this piece of technology, and there's this whole other kind of set of interactions between person, technology, and environment. And I think one of the roles is that we can play is to help ensure that that is a good match, between person, fit, and environment. That's going to make or break someone's technology experience, whether they consider that to be positive or negative. Um, and I think, again, kind of back to my earlier point, I think technology, it can be so impactful in access and in participation. Um, and that is it is just such a main enabler of living your life the way you want to live your life, right? And so that's kind of the role. So it's a little bit different to me in terms of the role of like physical therapy intervention, which is more episodic and intermittent, and that kind of problem focused, goal oriented, based on what a person wants to achieve. um, but in order for that to all work well, like, we need seamless technology. We need technology that's going to work the way a person wants it to work, to then allow that community engagement, to happen in a way that is meaningful for the user. Um, and and there's a lot still to explore with that in terms of design and implementation, and how technology is paid for, how much it costs, that sort of thing. Um, and so all of that is hugely impactful in my mind to people in the disability community.
Hmm. Those are really important points.